Hi, I'm Doyle.
And I'm Jordan, and I've got some things to say. I'm not exactly sure what the things I have to say tonight are, but I have a topic around which I want to start a conversation with you, Doyle, if you're up for that.
Shoot, go for it, man. I'm
So that
ready.
topic is really one word, and I think this is going to unfold into a lot of different things in a lot of different directions. And I think that there's a lot of rich discussion to be had around this word and people's conception of this word, what it means to different people. And I don't think we'll get through all of that discussion tonight. We may do multiple episodes on this. We may just come back to it later down the line at some point. But I just want to kind of get it out there because we've been kind of going down this philosophical path for a while. And this is just one of the kind of interesting points I think that's kind of, I won't even say tangential. It's kind of like overarching for a lot of the things that we've been talking about. The topic is freedom, and just generally that word and what that means, because I think the word freedom means different things to different people, and that's I think okay. I think people can have what it means to them. Now, what it objectively is defined as, that may be a different story, right? But I mean particularly how they attach to that word or don't attach to that word, emotionally, just completely with how they think about it, and also what kind of things that conjures in their mind. Are they averse to that the word? Are they very embracing of the word? Are they embracing of the word in their rhetoric and speech, but in their actions they're not embracing that? I think there's a lot of dynamics around that I think would be really cool to discuss. So with all that said, really, what I want to start with is another word then to kind of go along with this, because I
Yeah.
think that it's freedom itself is such a loaded word, and this other word's a loaded word, but I think the two words together
Right.
kind of have some interplay and are interesting to talk about. That other word's liberty, and that has a more I think specific kind of meaning than freedom, while also really encompassing all of freedom. So the meaning, I think, is specific, but the implications of liberty are broad ranging, including freedom
Mhm.
and things beyond that. So talked very abstractly to this point. So I'll bring some concreteness to this, and maybe I'll give you a little bit of time on the. I will give you some time here, because
No
what I
problem.
want to know, what I want to have happen here, though, is like a natural conversation between us to unfold,
Sure.
right? Instead of a
Yeah.
very like erudite try to dissect the word and where did it come from, what
Sure.
does it mean, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So
We don't want to have an academic discussion. We want to have a real a real down to earth discussion.
sure, a
Is what I think.
philosophical discussion, but one as it pertains to life in the trenches, so to speak, like actual
Right.
life on the
Right.
ground. Um,
Right.
and so for me, freedom is not a word that I associate with at all. It's not a word I think about much at all, and in fact, it does not evoke much of a reaction from me, right? I like freedom. I'm glad that ostensibly the United States is a free country, and so like that's all good and fine. But the word liberty resonates with me a lot more, and the reason being is that freedom is such a um, adjective to me. I mean, obviously, clearly, the word freedom isn't an adjective, but
Right.
my meaning is that it's more of a thing that's is descriptive of how things are. Like freedom, not is this, but freedom is this type of thing. And if you're doing this type of thing, you're free, or if you're allowed to do this type of thing, you're free. Versus, to me, the word liberty is more of a like a statement of a principle that liberty is this, and then all these other things derive from liberty. Versus it being descriptive of a thing. Does that make sense at all? Am I being
I,
clear?
it does, and I think too. When you mentioned liberty as a companion word or a comparison word to freedom, I thought more of a historical perspective, right? Because when I
Mm,
hear the word liberty, it rings history to me.
Sure.
right? From back in the 16 1700s, of the 17th and 18th century, when the pilgrims and all the people, and not wanting to get into the philosophical discussion of what they did when they landed here on the what are now the United States, but when they came here seeking liberty, right? And for a lot of foundational reasons, right? Not the least of which was freedom to worship, as they saw, and freedom from tyranny, using that term. But they didn't use the word freedom per se. They used liberty, right? And then it showed up in a lot of the documents of declaration. I'll say, that the early settlers and the early inhabitants of this country saw fit. So it rings more historical, whereas, and I don't think it's been misused and abused in definition to the extent that possibly freedom has, right? Because freedom has more of a my own personal spin on it, sense to it, right? Because people, they begin to take freedom and free and right and kind of blend them kind of in a way that doesn't do any one of those three terms,
Right.
Appropriate justice in understanding it, right? Because we talked recently in our last podcast about rights and where they emanated from, and what all, and certainly we may have oversimplified what that was, but I think, to me, it's a natural progression, to start talking about freedom and or liberty, and I think your statement surely sounds profound to me, as far as the differentiation between the two terms. But I think it's a bridge, and my concern with the bridge is that, is it a bridge too far? But I do want to kind of lighten the moment just a bit when we talk about freedom. When you're talking about defining it, I think me, and I'm about to pull out a little syllogism, not a syllogism. that really freedom, according to the great philosopher and poet of the '60s, Janis Joplin, in her song "Me and Bobby McGee," said, "Freedom is just another word for nothing left to lose." Right, and while that is a perspective, right, that is a perspective that you're unbounded, and you have nothing that you have, quote unquote, have is at risk of loss, whatever that means. I mean, what I'm saying, and I think that's a little silly definition, but I think in some respects it is also kind of a deep concept on freedom, which is different than, I think, what I understood you to be pushing forward on liberty. So anyway, I just see those as similar, but extremely different. Have some similarities, but also very significantly different as well.
Yeah, I think that example is apropos because that's certainly a meaning of freedom, right? That you're not bound by anything, and there's no reason to be restricted in how you choose to do anything or don't choose or whatever, right? Any kind of behavior or like thereof. So that I think it really kind of strikes at why the word freedom never really did much for me. Maybe when I was younger, but certainly not anywhere in my recent memory. Because freedom always seemed to me to be used by people in very narrow circumstances for very specific things. And to me, that's uninteresting because,
Right.
I understand everybody has things that they're interested in and they want to be able to pursue. And, I very much support that as long as they're not, again, as we've mentioned before, infringing on other people's ability to do such a thing. And so that's fine. So, but I'm not generally interested in what other people are doing. Now, maybe some specific people I'm interested in what they're doing, right? Sure, of course, that's the case. But just as a general rule, that has never. You know me pretty well. Have known me for quite a long time. That has never been of any real interest to me at all whatsoever. There have been times that the things that I am interested in have aligned with a great many people. But those times aren't. I wouldn't say they're all that frequent. But it depends on what you mean by a great many, right? And then of course the internet reveals a lot of lack of understanding about how many people there really are in the world, and how many, even a fraction of a percent of the population of the world represents a ton of people, that sort of a thing. And then once you can find those people very easily now with the internet, it's like it becomes much harder to say, well, I'm so unique. Not that that's been my position on why I've been like I've been. It's just been one of those things that's always been hard until, past 20 years, really 18 or so years, to find people who are as similar to me as, I would have wanted to have been able to associate with. And so, it gives you that kind of feeling of being disconnected. And so my MO when it comes to other people is I respect other people. I like other people to a degree, right? Because I really I understand the value in having civil relations, civil discourse, all of that kind of stuff, because there's a huge value that does not, and I'm going to put my phone on silent, there's a huge value in that is almost never stated out in public. Or rarely is, and this is a real tangent, but I just want to make this statement because I think we should have a podcast about this at some point, and I'm going to make this note. When I was a kid and growing up, it never really occurred to me why people would care to join organizations like the Freemasons, the Lions Club, Knights of Columbus. I mean, all of the Rotary Club, all of those, civic organizations. To me, it was like, well, I guess they just don't have anything else to do. Like, why would you do that? And as I grow older, it becomes more and more and more clear. And now it's absolutely crystal clear why people join that to me. Not only why, but why we need those kinds of organizations, which is the more important point, I think. But anyway, I would like us to have a podcast about that particularly, because I think that is something that is, whether intentionally or not, is under attack in society today. And that's one of the, I think, missing pieces, or pieces that's going missing, that is really humanity is desperate for, and they just don't, I think a lot of people don't know it.
Sure. Well, I mean, chasing that just a little bit more, I think there's a fundamental reason, or at least it stands out to me. There has been an obvious weakening. I won't call it a full breakdown, but an obvious weakening in the family unit, right?
Oh, sure.
And for a lot of reasons, and there are some that I think are generally accepted. The divorce rate continuing to rise and being more prevalent, and so that creates this splintered family, and at best, you've got this hybrid, family situation, which is not, I don't think, how humans were intended to be and live, but that's the way the society we are. And there are other reasons that are, we're much more highly charged in that. And I'm not meaning to speak politically in that regard, but there are a lot of reasons why the family is fractured and splintered to a great extent at this point.
Well, I think that I definitely agree with you at that point. And I think I would go farther than that, even that it's older. That issue is older than that, because even the idea of the nuclear family, so to speak, is a fracturing of the family tribe, right? And I'm not talking about tribalism's a good thing. That's not what I mean. But what I'm saying is that the more supportive, greater structure. Yes, exactly. Well, but even we're getting too deep into this topic, so I will cease and desist. Yeah, and I will bring back to the reason why I brought this up, which was that I am blessed at this point in my life to have the ability to have such close proximity to so many people who I not just align with, but I gel with when it comes to understand, like, how we think about the world. Not that we have the same views, but just how you think about the world, the things that you're interested in, all of that kind of stuff, and how you can find very specific crossovers among all of that. So my point being that I've never really cared much about other people, the whole freedom thing. It's never really mattered much to me what people said that I'm free to do this, or I do this because I'm free. I'm allowed to do this. Sure, that's fine, but those things never interest me. So freedom's too specific in that way. And again, this is just my formulation in my mind. So I think it's probably, at least to a degree, idiosyncratic to me, but. I've always seen liberty as something that's so general that it's like, yeah, definitely liberty is something I'm interested in, because it's about me being the one to determine my life, to decide for my life what I want to do, how I want to align myself, and being able to have thoughts that go against everybody else, just because, not because I want to accept thoughts that are against anybody else, because I want to consider them, because you don't grow by thinking and doing the same things over and over and over and over. You grow by
Right.
thinking and trying new things and different things. And of course, you can't do that wantonly, but you should at least try some different things. Some things are clearly safe to do that may be against convention, but maybe you should, maybe you shouldn't. But the thinking aspect of it is. The thinking aspect of it is well, I'm sorry, I just got distracted because I got a work call here. I'm trying to catch myself back up with what I was even talking about. The thinking aspect of it seems more important now than ever. Because of the climate that we find ourselves in, that we have to be able to consider things that are outside of what people think is like this narrow band of things that is acceptable to think about. Because if we don't, then how are we ever going to come up with novel solutions to the problems that we have? And I'm not talking
Sure.
just about politically. I'm talking about within the context of anything, a different career spaces, science, technology, etc.
Something you said a few moments ago reminded me of a topic that we mentioned before too, regarding the rights and their origin. Right? We talked a lot about that in the Declaration of Independence. The early founders of the United States, they said we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. Right. So they didn't bestow them. They're not saying that the Declaration of Independence bestowed those rights. Those were bestowed by our Creator, and then we end up having the efforts of man and government. We talked about that just being statutes are not bestowing anything. They're trying to, in feeble ways. I think the principled attempt is to protect those rights or to enforce those rights. And we know in some cases, in the unprincipled attempt, they're very selfish, trying other kinds of motives. But so the statutes are where the statutes and the laws, have a place, whether it's acceptable or not. They have a place. Versus
Sure.
rights are they go beyond any kind of government boundaries, any kind of state or entity. It is that they are related to being. When I think about that, freedom and liberty, I kind of look at that the same way. Freedoms probably are more related to, well, we're declaring you have this. We being the government, because you had, I think, a comment you made a few moments ago about being in the United States, that we're a free nation, right? Then freedom is related to the state, to the government, to the entity that is the
Right.
United States,
Right.
versus freedom being universal. And I think liberty tends to probably fall more toward the universal. And that even goes back to what the point I made about the early settlers in the United States, in this country. They were about liberty, right? Not to establish a government, but about the pursuit of liberty. And then they felt that they needed some sort of community to kind of help ensure and protect, right? And that was the direction they went. But that was to protect the liberty. Anyway, that's it. Just seemed something that just a light bulb. Your comments made a light bulb go off in my understanding, and gave me some clarity about something that I sensed, but now it allowed me to articulate the clarity that I feel and think. of what I felt. I mean, you ever,
Sure.
I'm sure you had feelings. You go, I feel this way, but I can't explain how I feel.
Of course.
And then something occurs, and you go, okay, now I can verbalize, I can articulate, what I feel, and even where I think it comes from, where it emanates from, where it originates from, and to me, what that does, it isn't, oh, I figured myself out. What it does is it affirms who I am, who I think I am, internally. Not affected by my external forces, or the external things or actors, upon me. It's who I am, internally. Which, in a nutshell, and we've talked around this before. This is why I love participating in our conversations, among other things. But this is a primary reason why I'm excited for us to be able to put this out in the into the internet ether, whatever. And if two people hear it, at least we're able to share. And then this is what I think, we're able to share some of the things about who we are, right? And that's cathartic and empowering.
Well, to your point about finally being able to articulate what we're going at here, it's a learning process too, because you when you try to talk about something in a coherent manner, it is a clarifying and focusing faculty that's required to do such a thing. And it's often when these kinds of topics, one does not talk much about. And so it's like you
Right.
have feelings about it and lots of thoughts about it, but they're generally kind of disorganized. So the speaking, it puts structure to that to make it, really manifest in this world, because otherwise it's just inside of you. And so the more that you do that, you hear yourself saying that, and then so you are basically learning from yourself. It's really interesting because, again, I don't want to go into too much a tangent about this, and we haven't talked too much about like the Bible, for example, on these, although I'm sure at some point we'll hit that. But that's what the Word is, in my view. The Bible talks about, always there's this synonymity. Is that a word? There's the synonymous nature
Thought
between
it should be.
between Christ and the Word, right? And in the beginning there was the Word, and all that kind of stuff.
The Word was God, and the Word was with God. Right. So it's that whole,
Correct,
you
correct.
say, the synonym.
So we've talked. I think we touched a little bit about this before, where like the law is God and the Word is Christ. Well, the reality is that the Word is the manifestation of the law. So us speak again. This is purely my view, and I'm not speaking for Doyle here. That us speaking these things is us trying to manifest God in this world, the law in this world. So we use the Word to try to manifest the law in this world, which is really interesting. Because I mean, if you look at it, there's a lot of scholarly work around the Bible that talks about these kinds of things. So that's not an idea unique to me. But the more that I meditate on that and think about those sorts of things, and especially the more I have these kinds of conversations with you, the more it's like I see how true that is, right, and how meaningful that is.
And it's very congruent with your value system and the things. Well, I'm speaking for you, I know, but I speak for myself. It's very congruent with my belief systems and the things that I've learned and the things that I've been taught, and in turn the things that I've attempted to teach, as well.
Sure.
It's not comforting as much as it is strengthening.
Yeah, and part of the deal too. I'm sorry, what?
I said, and strengthening and in the resolve of
Yeah.
what you believe, what I feel. Yeah.
Absolutely. For me, all of that kind of stuff has been a real journey to try to understand in an articulated manner the things that I have felt so deeply for so long. And for a long time, it was I didn't understand. So when I was younger, it was one of those things where you didn't have many feelings or thoughts about it. It was just it was. I won't say you, me, one. well, not one, me particularly, I had didn't have many feelings or thoughts about it per se. It just was, and for a very long time, I didn't have much other than that. And then at some point, I gained some feeling about it, and which is interesting. Well, I guess maybe it was more of a mental thing at first, and then that wasn't really much of a thing anymore for me. But then it became a feeling thing, and now it's become much more of an integrated thing where I I don't know how to articulate now. This is the problem, is that I've not spoken about a lot of these kinds of things to really anybody, and so articulating it is difficult. But for me, a lot of my understanding of the world with regards to, I'm going to say, metaphysical things, because one still has to characterize any kind of religion around the metaphysical. And I think that's still okay to do that, because there's nothing wrong with that. People want to decry metaphysical concepts, and it's like, well, you can decry human nature all you want, but that's where things come from. And I'm not trying to say it from a creationist perspective. I mean, you talk from a pure a psychoanalyst perspective. That's where things come from the metaphysical. But and that's science. So anyway, but point being is that for me, it has been a hugely eye-opening and integrative process to review the things that I had been taught in my youth, from the perspective of having lived life, understanding more about people in life, and then subsequently more about the things, studying from a meta perspective, the things that I had learned and been taught younger. It's one of those things where a lot of people go through that process and they end up rejecting what they were taught when they were younger, because they found something that's more true or better or right. Whereas for me, that was never the game. For me, it was, I just want to know the truth of things and why things are the way that they are. And I have come to what I feel is again, very integrated point of view that appreciates the reason why, as in my youth, I was taught the things I was taught. Does that make sense? That
Sure.
regardless, and this does not matter, regardless of the absolute fact or myth of whatever I was taught in youth, does not do anything to detract from the utility of what I was taught in my youth, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Sure. And it wasn't something that conflicts with the your adult view of the world, right?
Correct.
In fact, it may have actually influenced it to some extent, or it's in progressive revelation of it.
Well,
versus,
again, going back to this idea of Christ being the Word, and then also calling the Bible the Word. I think that's a parallelism that I don't agree with fully, because I don't think all of the Bible is all of the Word. And I'm not saying Word of God. That whole thing, we're getting into some weird dictional areas here.
Yes.
But my point being is that I think that there are lots of parts of the Bible that are instructive in a way that can't be taught, have to be learned. And then in retrospect, you have to see it and understand. You can't just hear the words and know. You just can't.
Sure. Well, and there's I believe it was in out of the book of John, and I could be the wrong book, but it when it was toward the end of that book, it said the world cannot contain in essence, the word, and it referenced what Jesus taught, but it was the word, and that sort of is supportive of your point as well. That tells believers that there was more to it than just these words that were captured here. And then let's just be really real here. The Holy Bible, as it's assembled today, is an assembly of scriptures that early church leaders determined sufficient to include. Right now, obviously, with divine guidance is the belief and the thought there. But I think to your point, that doesn't mean it's the only divine guidance that led to the revelation of the Word
Yes.
in the sense that you're talking about.
And a
Yeah,
big part of that too, and this is something that's been a real, again, journey for me, is that, you hear about all these, I mean, like the Da Vinci Code, right? Where they're talking about the whole deal with the Council of Nicaea, and that's not where that idea originates, but that's where it got, I think where anybody, 90+% of people who've ever heard the name Council of Nicaea heard it by watching or reading the Da Vinci Code. But I mean, you talk about that, and people want to talk about, oh, well, that was just a political organization, or at least quasi-political organization that came together to organize the Bible, mostly as we know it now. But the reality of it is, it doesn't matter. I see that as a pure form of utility. That it was assembled that way to be as of the highest utility it could be for those people at the time. And I don't think that same level of utility is correct for people today, because humans change. Humans need. I'm not saying we need a new Bible. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is, I think we need a new way of making use of that tool that we have to understand who we are and what we're here for. And to your point, I think that there are resources that are equally important beyond the covers of the Bible for understanding that self-same thing. And one of the points, we've gone way off the script here, but I don't know that I care at this point. I got to get these thoughts out, talking about learning as you say it.
You got to say it.
Yeah, absolutely. We were talking, you and I were, Doyle, a little earlier this week, where we were talking about some things kind of tangentially related to this. And one of the things that really irks me, and I'm not trying to say this as an attack on atheism. I really am not. But something that bothers me very greatly about the whole atheist perspective, and I'm not one here sitting to say that I believe in God per se, because it depends on what you mean by God. That's the whole Jordan Peterson line. Do you believe in God? Well, it depends on what you mean by God. But I think he articulates a lot of things very well. I don't fully agree with everything Jordan Peterson says about it either. But here's what I will say is my perspective on the atheist position. I understand if you want to take that as a Occam's razor position, right? Are you familiar with Occam's razor?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so assume the fewest amount of things, and that's probably likely your explanation. So you're assuming a lot less by taking the atheistic position or agnostic position, possibly even, and that's very true. I think that's a respectable position to take on those bases, or on that basis. But beyond that, when it becomes a position to take as a counter position to a theistic position, whether monotheistic or polytheistic, it doesn't matter. And when an atheistic position you're taking, basically, in my mind, I always think about this as the rebellious teenager. I'm not going to go to church. I don't believe in God.
Mm-hmm.
That sort of thing. And you have people all throughout their life that's really why they're an atheist, and why they label themselves an atheist. There's a lot of people like that. And to those people, it's like, I don't understand why you want to be so counter the theist or monotheist or polytheist position, because that's not a rational basis. That's not what you're doing is you're trying to allow other people to do the heavy lifting for you and just ride on their coattails. It's like, have you come to that position rationally? Okay, let's talk about it. And then you drop something like the Occam razor position. Okay, I got you. That makes sense. At least you've thought about it. But the thing that really irks me about this is that when you want to the people who try to explicitly, definitively claim that there's no such thing as God, it's like the whole concept is ludicrous and immediately falls into irrationality to even make such a claim. So does the claim that God exists, right? I think as well, for the other side of the same coin, which is God. The whole idea and conception of God is something beyond humans. So how could you ever hope to even understand what God is, whether God exists or not? So it's almost what's the it's a claim that makes no sense. Well, there's a word for that, like in mathematics, if you're trying to assert something that is nonsensical, there's a phrase for it. And I can't remember now what it is, but it's one of those kinds of claims where like it doesn't like you. It's not improvable. That's certainly the case, right? It's non
Mhm.
provable either position. So it's not a real claim. And that's the thing is it's not a real premise or not a premise, but it's not a real claim to try to prove or disprove because it's not provable. Um, and so I understand if you don't want to go to church. I understand if you don't want to believe in God. I understand if you don't want to live your life like God exists. I understand all of that. That's understandable. What I don't understand is when you want to go out there and kind of decry the idea of God just as an argument and as a position. And I understand there's a lot of people who promulgate the idea of God, and I have almost equally the same problem with those types as well, because their promulgation of God is not founded in having humans understand how that concept relates to how they should live uprightly, forthrightly in the world. It's more of a, here is my dogma, you must accept it. And that to me, that is just as much of an affront to the concept of God as the atheist position claiming that God does not exist.
Oh, sure. That's not an accurate, or at least from my perspective and belief, that's not an accurate depiction of what I believe that God and faith and the Word is. It's not, ritual. It's not dogma. It's not, absoluteness in the sense of this. It's a to the letter requirement, if you will. I mean, no,
Yeah.
I think it is more profound than that, right? That to my perspective is, this is not addressing what you're talking about. The point of both sides of that being sort of unprovable, but that there is the idea of some degree of reason and rationale that can be applied, and when it is, then that's where there is uh, proof in the sense of, how do I put this? It's not in the scientific sense, but in the um, and I hate to use the word spiritual sense, but in the sense that, um, worst case, who does it harm, right? I mean,
Right.
it's
But that's not a
so
proof.
if I
My point is
I
that's not
understand.
proof. It's useful. That's the point. Is it's useful, and so
Excellent clarification.
it's a
That's why I
tool.
was struggling with
It's
the word. That's why I was struggling with how
Yeah,
to say that.
it's a tool and it's a necessary tool for humans. Absolutely, I think it's an absolutely necessary tool for humans. But it doesn't need proving. Does it help you? Does it help you or doesn't it help you? That's the thing. And so if someone wants to claim it doesn't help them, that's fine. But I find it hard to believe that a human can go through this life and the things that a human can go through, and certainly all of the sordid array of terrible things that a human can go through, and not see that as a potentially useful tool, and want to claim that I'm too smart to use that tool. Okay, that's fine. See how that works out for you. That, I mean, to me, that's
Mhm.
that's I know that's very very flippant of me to say it that way, but I mean, why would you reject a hand if you're drowning? Why would you reject a hand up?
Well, yes and no. It could be seen as flippant, but if you go back to where we began tonight, the freedom and liberty idea, right? The liberty aspect of it
Yeah,
is it's okay. It's fine if you want to believe or feel or think or even expound that this is what you think and you don't understand why anyone else would think and believe anything different. That's okay, as long as you respect the liberty of the others to do so, the same liberty that you have to think and feel this way, not you, this one, versus the liberty of others to think and feel just the opposite,
right.
or certainly significantly differently, and live the liberty of their lives, the aspects of their lives that in their mind are consistent with that, and and that are reflective of that in some cases, or aspirational of that.
Yeah,
Yeah. So I think we chased a dirt road down here in the country vernacular, but I think it was a valid one because I think I see that it's a relevant what we said earlier, down in the everyday. This is some of the everyday stuff, right?
Yeah.
When we start talking about the differences between freedom and liberty and rights and statutes and laws and things of that sort, where those things really matter is in how people choose to be, choose to live, and choose to be. And I mean, obviously, the whole existence of a God, or of the God, or of you know no God, if that's what you so elect, that is the manifestation of what we've called up to this point liberty. I
Sure.
think, right?
Oh yeah.
The the and to use one of your terms, that we've talked about and you've shared before with me, the whole thing about self determination, right? This is sort of that whole idea emanates from liberty, that you can choose for yourself all of this array of things that you believe, things that you want to be, things that, when I say be, I don't mean I want to be a fireman when I grow up, or I want to be an astronaut, but I mean, when I say when you want to be, as far as the kind of person, the kind of
The
human, the
the
kind of
character you
living,
cultivate.
the character you cultivate, whether that character be a character, or whether that character be something of respect and honor, and what all. Again, that's I use that, but kind of silly in a sense, facetiously, but it is relevant, right? You
Sure.
know, if people want to be a clown, and it's within the bounds of not hurting or affecting anyone else, then so be it. I mean, that's the beauty of liberty, right? We don't have to follow the same mold. Now, the sad part is, a sad part is that so many people, they really don't want liberty. They don't want the the responsibility
Sure.
that goes with that. They don't want to think. They don't want to. They don't want to uh, be at risk. They don't want to take the risks that are associated with liberty, right? And I mean, now we can really pick another path to go down when we talk about liberty and
Right.
risks and associate, the things that can relate to and
Well,
pertain to.
you
Uh,
say they don't want to take the risks, but I think the reality of that is that they want to ignore the risk that they take, because the not taking on that responsibility and the risk thereof is not eschewing risk generally in life. Though
that's right.
you're just moving it around, right? It's like shell game,
That's
and you're
right.
moving it where
That's
you
right.
can't see it, and so you don't think about it, and so basically it's choosing to live in ignorance, if you ask me.
That's right. I think that's a very, very appropriate way to put it. It's in ignorance versus in intent, right?
Yes,
Which is sort of what liberty enables, or is a great result, is that you can have the intent to do and be, because of the liberty that you're endowed with, or that you're imbued with, or that you, I don't know, however it arrives. I don't know what word to use, because I don't want to misstate it, right? But however liberty arrives to the individual, it's you can have your own intent to be and to do. And I think, in terms of people that they and think of young people as they're growing up, and they live, either in a typical, family, where mom and dad are together, and it's 2.3 kids, or whatever the statistical average is, or even if they're not, if they're in an atypical family, in a single parent household, and or not middle class, or not urban, and maybe they're urban, maybe not urban, maybe suburban, not suburban, maybe rural, or whatever, but whatever. And then it's easy to just follow the path of where they came from,
sure.
right? If you know what I'm saying. I mean, the single parent, might, may or may not have a professional, career, something that they're able to be the success level that they aspire to. Maybe just a laborer or someone that is unskilled, right? And then the child might follow that example, or they may break out of that, right? They may, and the parents may help enable them to their children to do better than them, because they know that they need a helping hand, or they need a boost, or they need, motivation, or need to be led, or in some fashion. Um, but when I say that they choose, some people are lazy, and they don't think, they don't make the choice. There's nothing wrong with being, a laborer. There's nothing wrong with being a skilled laborer, or a hardworking person that works hard every day, and makes a decent living wage, but maybe will never get rich. Maybe that's not what they aspire to do. They
Right.
aspire to be. They aspire to be happy, and to do for others, and to other aspects of life that are more fulfilling to them than how big their paycheck is, as long as they have enough, right? I mean, I know there's that
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
that question there, and that's okay, right? But I think there's too many people in the world, and especially in this country now. This is just my opinion, one man's opinion. Don't have any statistics to back this up. That there are a large number of people that don't want to be intentional about the exercise of their liberty. They want to be de facto and just go with a flow, whatever flow they happen to think, you know, looks the best, whatever flow they happen to think is the easiest, or whatever flow they happen to think is, you know, smells the best, whatever the attraction it might be to them. And that to me is a sad statement. I hope I'm wrong. I truly hope that I'm wrong. I hope that there are more people that are motivated to pave their own way, or to direct their own path. It doesn't have to be a new path. It does not have to be a new path to be their own path, right? Their
Sure.
own path could be one they chose that's similar to someone else, because they aspire to be something different than what they are, or be somewhere different than they are, or accomplish something different than they've accomplished. And in any event, as someone on the middle or the latter half of his path, things like this are clearer to me now than I think they were 25, 30, 40 years ago. And I'm not saddened by it. In fact, I'm actually encouraged by it, right? Because I think it's something that I can sort of look back down the road and go, hey, think about this.
Yeah.
Let me just
Sure.
tell you, someone who's been, and throw tidbits of crumbs of, hey, think about this. Don't forget that. Define your own way. That kind of thing. That I know a lot of people talk about stuff like that, but not nearly as many do about something like that as talk about something like that, in my estimation.
Because here's the I think the unfortunate reality we find ourselves in. So there are some people who would never do that, right? No matter what, just because of whether it be some sort of predisposition. And I don't want to talk about externalities or external factors at all. And just
Mhm.
particularly just it's not their nature to be like that. And I think that's okay too, to a degree. I think the problem, the unfortunate part that we find ourselves in, is that we have a system or a set of systems that are set up to not promote that. They're set up to look like they promote that, but actually promote the opposite of that. And that's what's scary to me, is that you have like the educational system, which is very clearly intended. Like again, I'm speaking about the United States. I'm speaking about the public education we have
Public,
here,
yeah.
um, is clearly set up to produce a certain kind of person who is already vastly unequipped to deal with the modern world. Right? You take a graduate, even the brightest person who's gone through the most rigorous public education in this country, and they are still not really fit for most occupations out the gate. And you can say,
Mhm.
oh, well, that's what secondary education or post secondary education is for. Not really. I mean, not until only very recently is that the case, right? Post
Hmm.
secondary education was traditionally for people who wanted to be lifelong scholars, right? And then
Hmm.
of course there was some expansion of that. You know, probably I would say maybe early 1900s, late 1800s. There was some expansion beyond that, but still for the vast majority, because you have medicine, right? Medicine's really coming up, and so they started schooling around that. Makes sense, right? Um,
Hmm. Hmm.
and I'm not saying it doesn't make sense now to have that, but I think that mindset does not make sense. And I think that there are problems that have arisen from taking that mindset that have allowed our public education system to further entrench itself as a quagmire for young minds in this country. Um, and it's just sad because that's what's giving them this lack of motivation. I think this lack of motivation for trying to find their own path and make their own path is because they've met so much resistance. Any second that they've tried to act in an individual manner, they've been slapped back right back in line and told to shut up and don't talk. Right? And then that kind of treatment of kids is abuse, and they've been subject to it for 13 years straight. What the heck do you think they're going to come out like? I mean, let's be honest about it. It is a terrible situation in our public education. And then you go and look at the state of our universities right now, and yeah, that's the conservative talking point. Yeah, the universities suck. I don't care about conservative talking points. I care about go looking at the dang facts. Tell me, tell
Hmm.
me that the facts don't say that our universities are instilling overwhelmingly ridiculous amounts of ideas in kids' heads. I'm not saying they shouldn't learn about those ideas. I'm not saying they shouldn't be taught. What I'm saying is that they need to be taught a plurality of ideas so that they can start to really parse things and think on their own. And that is not what they're being taught, even at that level. So you want to come and say that, post-secondary education is where people really learn about, their careers and how to function in the world. I say, show me the evidence. Anyway,
Hmm.
I'm getting a little hot under the collar about that one because that's something I feel very passionate about because
Oh, sure.
I don't want to stand here and say victim. Oh, I'm a victim. But I feel like I could have made so much more progress in my life had I been in some other kind of situation for learning growing up. And I don't blame my parents for that one bit at all. I don't blame anybody one bit that at all because that's just where that's just the facts of what happened, right? Life is what life is. You have to meet life with what it is. But the reality of it is I feel like I had some measure of potential that was squandered because of the system. Imagine how many other kids have so much more potential that was squandered because of the system. It is a human travesty that we're continuing to allow this to happen. That's the last I'll say about that.
Well, yeah, and I will lighten the tone just a minute. When I look back on, and I do not dis, in fact, I fully agree with your characterization and your explanation about the educational system. But I want to speak about the people that I personally encountered, and that I'm sure the ones that you encountered, people being the teachers.
Sure.
There were a lot of really, really good people, well intentioned, great
Absolutely.
heart,
Without
great
question.
motivation, and the problem isn't them. The problem wasn't the teachers or at least in all cases, it's not the teachers. There are
Well,
some
that's
bad
why
teachers, just
that's why I
apple.
said the system, right? The system's
Right.
the problem.
And I was making that
Yeah.
distinction, right? Because too
Yes.
many
It's good
times
to call that out.
it's not dissimilar to what's going on right now about the police, right? That this whole thing about defund the police, and in Minneapolis is shutting down its police force and all these things, and that's the overreaction to the point of there's always bad apples in every group. I don't care what kind of group it is. There are bad apples in every group, and it just so happens that the police, their bad behavior can result in immediate life and death situations.
And the system doesn't have
And
a good mechanism for dealing with that. That's a huge
that's
problem.
correct. That's right.
Because it's a
Again, that goes back
monopoly,
to
and that's the reason why is it's a monopoly. Whenever you have a monopoly provider of any service, you get terrible service at an extremely high price.
right. But the point being is that there are good participants and good individuals in
Sure.
the police force and schools and education. The systems are what are broken, and the systems are broken because the leaders and the bureaucrats up are getting so far removed from the actual outcomes, right? They're measuring numbers. They're measuring test scores. They're measuring certain things that motivate and incent them to continue to move down the path that they're on, versus motivate and incent them to change and do the more advantageous or the more beneficial things for the outcomes that they truly want. What is an educated child, right? And it isn't a child that can take a standardized test and make the teacher look really good that they've accomplished something with their class.
Correct.
Right, and that's where we find ourselves today, right? It's, and I'm sure that, at your age, standardized tests were a much bigger issue than they were even for me. We had, back in the 60s and the 70s, we had to take achievement tests, is what they call them, achievement tests, right? And everyone took them, and it was more of a piece of pride, because when you found out what your scores were, you knew what percentile you fell in this subject and that subject, and so that gave you a piece of some degree of pride on what you had learned, because we felt like it was a measure of what we had learned. Now, whether it was or not, I can't really speak to, but at the time, that was how it was personally interpreted.
Sure.
And I think now the testing has shifted to where it's a measure of the teacher, it's a measure of the school, it's a measure of the school system, and the state school system, whatever the school board or whatever the local system is, and then the state system, rather than what the child has learned, what the child has done. I think that's a fatal turn, right? Because it's measuring the wrong thing. And as well as I do, the best way to get the wrong result is to measure the wrong thing. And I think that's what's happening.
Well, I think that is a big problem, and I think that needs to be addressed. But I think the reality of it is there's some really bad incentives going on here that, as far as I'm aware, schools are funded by how many kids they have in seats and how often they're there. So, like, if attendance is down, they get less money, even if it's the same number of kids. And so, like, what? Not only that, the funding structure is terrible, right? Because you have a huge increase in the cost, and there's a phenomenal guy who's on Twitter a lot, who's really an advocate for like homeschooling and stuff like that. His name's Corey DeAngelis. I've seen him on a couple podcasts, and he's been really on a tear recently because could be another topic for podcasts, because there's some really draconian talk around the ideas about homeschooling and whatnot right now. But putting that aside, he's been hammering the whole education issue for a very long time, and recently he's become coming into a lot more prominence with it, where he keeps talking about how funding, like cost of education per child has been going through the roof. Yet if you take a look at teachers' pay, when adjusted for inflation, it's basically the same, if not going down. And so it's like, well, why is that? Where's that cost going? Where's that money going? Are our kids better educated? I don't think you can argue that they're better educated now. So where's that money going? It's getting sucked into administration. Well, how is that happening? Well, all of the standardized tests and all the kind of stuff that you're talking about, right? And so these school systems are incented to create bureaucracy, even at the lowest levels, basically. And since when has bureaucracy been an efficient way to make anything happen, right?
Since the federal government created that $1,500 hammer about 30 years ago.
Right. Well, did they create the sickle to go along with it? I mean, goodness gracious. And that's the thing, is that's a lot of people think that the way that you have something done efficiently is you have a board of scientists to say the best way to do it, and then you do it the way that they say it, even though these scientists have never done this thing a day in their life. I don't understand. Scientists can be sometimes they're smart people, sometimes they're not. But should they really be dictating how we run society? I don't think so. I think people who have effectively run things in society should be having a say in how we run society. Anyway, it's a different discussion as well. But
I was going to say, that's a whole nother path there too, right?
Yeah. I don't even know where we jumped off on this. We started talking about I got lit about education, and then it's like,
I think it happened when I brought up self-determination,
oh
and
yeah,
the whole thing about liberty and the self-determination, and how that I think too many people in at least in this country, or at least my belief is that in this country, people really, they think they want to be self-determinant, but they don't want to take the risk to take the action. And how does that happen? And it's because it's so much easier not to, right?
sure.
And then that led us down the path of the other things. So,
Joel,
you think
I've
this might be a good?
I got a phrase for you. We're getting soft.
Yeah. Uh, do you think this is probably a good time for us
Yeah.
to kind of wrap up for the night? Because we've created a bunch of doors to go through, and
Yep.
I've made a couple of notes because I want us to in future conversations and future podcasts to do that. I mean, some of the things, we talked about civic organizations and the whole idea of community, and the why and the what and the how on those, and the educational system failures. Although we chased that one pretty good, but I think there's still a whole lot more ground to cover.
Oh yeah. I mean, there's a
on
lot of
that.
specifics we could talk about in that one.
Yeah, how they should be measured, how they are measured, how they should be measured, and then I wrote down who should be measured. Right?
Sure.
I don't think teachers. I don't think teachers should be measured. I mean, you know what? Measure students, right? The measure of the teacher doesn't tell you anything. The
Right.
measure of the teacher doesn't tell you anything about the
Well,
students.
that's not the goal.
It's
The goal is to educate the kids, right?
right, and I think that's I'm hoping that as we progress over the next few years, that there'll be some of that where some questions raised that might have otherwise not been raised, in that regard. The whole mention you mentioned about scientists. I think there's 2 or 3 avenues for us to pursue down the road, and this whole idea of like right now, the World Health Organization, and even within the United States, this country's own, executive director of infectious diseases, Dr. Fauci, what makes him an expert on, quarantining and things of that sort. And I know there's lots of good reasons, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't
Sure. Well,
have quarantine
well,
per se, or that we shouldn't consider that.
then you're
But
striking at
he's
the trunk. You go a little bit lower, then it just becomes trust. How do you know who to trust, why to trust, when to trust, right? Because that's
right.
what underlies
Right.
all this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, and I think there are things there that they really, if we're open with it, we can draw lines back from each of these topics back to the concept of liberty,
Of
and
course.
how liberty either is challenged or affected by them, or how we should allow liberty to affect them. And I don't know if that makes sense to a lot of people, but hopefully you get where I'm coming from, what I'm trying to drive at on that, and that
Well,
line
yeah.
of thinking there.
I think when you say liberty affect them, I think is more of the line. I would conceive that as, how do we appropriately firewall things from having deleterious effects on the other, right?
Yes. When I say liberty in and of itself isn't a thing that acts, right?
Right.
It
Right.
it is a state under which, not state. State's not a good word. It is a
That's a confusing word in this
concept.
context.
Yes, it is a concept under which people can act to make an effect and affect the circumstances in these topics. Affect the educational system, affect communities and civic organizations, and the roles they play, and affect some of the failures that we've alluded to and even directly spoke of. So, yeah, that's where I'm coming from.
Sounds good.
Before I get wound up again, maybe we should really wrap it up.
That seems appropriate.
I think we're scratching the surface of some things that I'm looking forward and really excited about going more deeply into down the road.
Absolutely, same here. I always enjoy our talks. I know I kind of end every episode that way, but I say that because I am reminded each time how much I actually do, and how this process of articulation of forming the word in the world is, to me, just an important and I think you used the word cathartic. I think that's very appropriate. It's very cathartic to be able to finally articulate it and get it out of my brain and into voice. So good
Yeah,
stuff.
from feelings to explanation and articulation. Yeah, absolutely. Great night.
Yep.
Thoroughly enjoyed it.
Same here.
Until we come together again.
Alrighty.
Good night, my friend.
We'll see you. Take care, Doyle.
See ya. Good night.